we are all plugged into the global media, and we watch everything happening around the world from the comfort of our lounge rooms. You know, we all have our TV and we turn on our TV and watch the news, and we see extraordinary images almost every day. Sometimes of war and sometimes of disaster, sometimes tsunamis, sometimes earthquakes, all sorts of things. And we watch, you know, people who have lost their homes, people who have lost their relatives, people who are searching for family members. We watch lines of refugees. We see all of these images on our television on a daily basis. And sometimes the cameras take us right into those people's faces, and we can see right into the hearts of their pain and suffering. And I wonder how you feel. How do you feel inside? Does it seem real, or does it sometimes seem like another reality television show? You know, how does it really feel inside when you see the suffering of our world family, which we see on a daily basis? Do you sometimes feel a bit helpless and hopeless because often we feel we can't do much? Or maybe you feel a bit desensitized. We see so much of it that sometimes it's hard to feel really affected or influenced by it. Or maybe sometimes you feel a bit upset or angry that so much seems to happen which could be avoided. Or sometimes maybe you just want to turn off that television. You've had enough. You can't bear to see anymore. I wonder how you feel when you really watch the suffering of our human family. Or perhaps these most human of all feelings, which is to have a sense of compassion, emerges inside of you. I have a friend here in Australia who's a journalist, and he was saying to me once that he thought the biggest problem in our world, and our world has a lot of problems, as you all know, he feels the biggest crisis in humanity is that we have lost our compassion for each other. Sometimes it seems that we are so selfish or self-absorbed in our lives that it's so difficult to extend that compassion for the other. And yet it seems that most people, so many people, feel they're struggling to survive in their own lives, and they just don't have the energy to offer compassion to others. And yet, I would say of almost all human feelings, compassion defines us as a human being, to really reach out and connect with the other, to offer understanding and support for those around me. And yet, I think for most of us, seeing the world situation, which seems to get worse day by day, you know, we do feel a bit helpless and feel we can't do much. So the real question for me about this subject of compassion, do I have that day-to-day compassion for those that I interact with on a daily basis, my immediate family and my work colleagues? You know, sometimes I feel we can sit at home watching the TV and we see all what's happening in Ukraine, for instance, and we can feel so much compassion for those people, that global compassion. And yet there's someone sitting in the room with me, a family member who's suffering. Do I really acknowledge their suffering? Do I feel support for their suffering? As you know, 1 in 3 of us these days has some form of mental health issue, maybe depression, maybe anxiety. Do I extend my compassion to them? Because it seems to me it's much more challenging to have this day-to-day compassion for those that I really know well than those that I don't really know that I see on the television. And I remember once that one of the Brahma Kumaris sisters who was living in Turkey, she was telling me, and you may remember, it's quite a long time ago now, but there was a huge earthquake in Turkey and tens of thousands of people passed away. And she said for a whole week, they just stayed at home. They couldn't go out. And on the day that she could leave her home, she went down to the water, the Bosphorus. Istanbul's a very, very beautiful city. And she was going for a walk. And as she was walking, there was a car accident. 2 men had a crash. And she said, like all big cities in the world, usually people will get out of their cars, argue, blame each other, even physically fight. And she said she saw this extraordinary scene that these 2 men hopped out of their cars, came up to each other and embraced each other. They hugged each other. Because the compassion had come out, everyone was suffering. Everyone had lost relatives. Everyone was finding life difficult. And so they offered that compassion to each other. And, sometimes I have a question, why isn't it always there? Why is it that sometimes we seem to have to go through such big problems and big challenges that the compassion emerges? But one thing I have learned, that it sits inside all of us, the capacity to have compassion for others sits inside all of us. It's just that how easy is it to bring it out? Do we have to wait for disasters and huge challenges? Or do I live on a day-to-day basis with my compassion? And what is compassion? To me, it's like an understanding or empathy for another's suffering. In the Latin language, compassion really means co-suffering. In a way, I'm relating to what you are going through. To me, compassion is one of the most fundamental expressions of love. It's one of the most natural ways to show my love for another. And in a way, it's an active desire to alleviate the suffering of those around me. And if you look into all the great traditions of our world, the great religions of our world, usually compassion is one of the most obvious expressions of love for God. In Buddhism, there's a story about Buddha, that one of his main disciples asked him a question. And he said, would you say that loving kindness and compassion is part of our practice? And Buddha said, no. Loving kindness and compassion is not part of our practice. Loving kindness and compassion is all of our practice. And when you think of it, how does spirituality come out? If I really love God, if I'm a spiritual person, how does that emerge? It will emerge with that loving kindness and compassion for the other. Even in the Quran, and I have read all the scriptures of the world, in the Quran, if my memory serves me, there's well over 100 verses, something like 114. And 113 verses of the Quran begin with the words, in the name of the compassionate and merciful one. It's almost like the main quality attributed to God in the Quran. And if I look at my own life and how I feel, I would say that the thing that really, whenever I feel compassion, I really feel healthy inside. It just feels, this is how life is supposed to be, to offer that empathy, that understanding, that support, that love for the other. And to me, compassion is a form of selflessness. It doesn't want anything. It only wants to give and support. But one of the most beautiful things about true compassion is that it suspends judgment. and offers, in a sense, a non-judgmental love towards the other. Because it's very easy to say, goodness, don't you realize why you're suffering? Can't you see what you have done to create this situation in your life? In a way, true compassion is like a decision that I don't focus on the reasons. I see that you are suffering, so I just offer a compassionate attitude. And there's a lovely story about a man who was traveling in a train, and he had his 2 children with him. And the children were running around the train, screaming, yelling, jumping on chairs, banging things. And all the other passengers were getting extremely upset, not so much with the children, but with the father. And it went on for a while. And so in the end, one of the passengers sort of snapped at the father and said, "What sort of parent are you to allow your children to behave in this way?" Because the man was just staring out the window as the train was going, ignoring his children's behavior. And then he turned to this person and said very, very quietly, "Well, I've just come from the hospital and the children's mother has just died." And I think, you know how in life, instantly, that very judgmental, critical human mind just turned in a second to compassion. And so often I think about that we make a lot of assumptions about other people and why they're behaving in the way they do. And yet often when we know the truth, we let go these assumptions and these judgments, and we really begin to offer them compassion. The compassion for me has a selflessness. Compassion suspends judgment. And compassion really is an aspect of humility. Because rather than thinking, well, I'm okay and you're not okay, there's the feeling you are my brother, you are my sister, and I feel I would like to offer support for you. And so it's a really beautiful quality. And I wonder, when do you feel these feelings of compassion emerge in you? For me, I've been a meditator now for 47 years. What I love to do is sit in the early morning as a child, sit in front of the Supreme Soul, sit in front of God, and allow myself to be loved by God. To me, that's the supreme life experience. And I observe myself, because spirituality is this wonderful self-observation. You observe how you respond. The more I feel loved, the more I feel belonging, the more my compassion grows. I would say that the most natural response for a love for God is to have compassion for my human family. And really look at a lot of the great people in this world, the Mother Teresas of the world, as I often call them, who dedicate their life to compassion. Where does it come from? I would say the seed is a deep, deep love for God. And when we have that deep love for God, the deeper the love, the more it seems to elicit this compassion. And yet in saying that, I think there's a lot of questions that arise in me about compassion. Does compassion have limits? Does compassion really have limits? Am I always compassionate? Am I compassionate for some and not for others? And once I was in Africa and I was talking to a judge, and she was telling me she was always in court with people who perform crimes. And she was openly saying that really as a judge, I really try to be compassionate. It's the role of a judge not to be judgmental, so to speak, but to offer compassion. But she said there's one group of people I can't feel compassion for, and that is pedophiles, abusers of children. And she wasn't actually judging the pedophile. She was looking at herself. Why can't I feel a compassion for all? Because in life, sometimes we have compassion for the oppressed, for the poor, for the powerless, but we have anger for the oppressors, the rich, and the powerful. And so, do you think it's possible to have compassion for all? Not only the oppressed, but the oppressors. Not only the poor, but the rich. Not only the powerless, but the powerful. Is it possible? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because once I went to a talk with the Dalai Lama, and he was giving a talk in Sydney. And as he was giving his talk, near the end of his talk, he asked for questions. And a young Chinese man stood up. Because as you know, China has taken over Tibet. And he said to the Dalai Lama, "Do you hate the Chinese?" He said it that strongly. And the Dalai Lama said, "No, I don't." And the young man said, "I don't believe you. You must, because they've chopped down all the trees. There's been a lot of violence and very unpleasant things happen in Tibet." And then the Dalai Lama said, "No, because my understanding of the law of karma is that when you behave in that way, when you oppress or you treat people badly, then the law of karma means that we will reap that fruit in the future. So if we oppress now, often we feel oppressed in the future too. So I have compassion. If I'm giving suffering now, often that means that I will reap the fruit of that in the future." And so, sometimes I think that what he was really saying, I have compassion for the oppressed and the oppressors. I have compassion for everybody, which God does too. Or sometimes, is my compassion, another question, is it selective? Have you noticed that sometimes you can have compassion for one family member and not another? Sometimes you seem to have a lot of compassion for one group in the community or society or the world and not other groups. Sometimes you have compassion for one friend and not another. And strangely, in human nature, it seems that the more we become familiar with people, we know them as they really are, the harder it is to really offer compassion. And I think this is why spiritual people can be compassionate, because a true state of spirituality is to be very, very loving, caring, compassionate, but detached. And it seems to me that the more I'm detached, which really means to be loving and caring, but uninfluenced by, I can offer compassion. The more I'm influenced by other people, the harder it is for me to really begin to offer compassion. Or perhaps we would say, does my compassion exhaust me? That's another question. I know a social worker here, and she was telling me once that I said to her, how are you going? And she said, "Oh, I've got compassion burnout." I'd never heard that expression before, compassion burnout. And she said, it's just people are so needy. It never stops. Dr. Manoj is a doctor, and I think the people in the caring professions, they're just amazing because the demands on them just are exponential at the moment. And this poor woman said, "I'm just not coping anymore. I have this compassion burnout. I feel exhausted." Or sometimes, is my compassion condescending? I'm okay, but you're not okay. Or even I think sometimes my compassion can be based on guilt. Somehow I feel responsible for your suffering. So it's a wonderful quality, but perhaps there's many questions that emerge But you know, my observation is that life is an amazing teacher. Life is an incredible teacher. And sometimes experiences of life make us compassionate. My own life experience withdraws my capacity to really offer compassion to others. And you know, once I was in the headquarters of the Brahma Kumaris in Mount Abu, and there was a wonderful man from the UK called Lord David Ennals. He was from the House of Lords, a very, very dear friend of the BKs. And actually, I was teaching him meditation, giving him the meditation course. And one morning I went over at sunrise to where he was staying, and we sat outside on the veranda watching the sunrise. It was just beautiful, so peaceful. And he told me his story, because he was one of the people who began the League of Nations, which became the United Nations. He was one of the great supporters of the United Nations. He was one of the first people to support the Dalai Lama and so many causes around the world. His life was like a monument to compassion for the poor and the underprivileged in the world. And he told me an incredible story that brought out that sense of compassion in his life. But when he was just 18, he joined the British Army during the Second World War. And just as a young man, just out of school, he was a paratrooper and he was dropped into France when the war, you know, the Second World War. And in the middle of the night, he said, with the other young men the same age as me, we were dropped into France, and we were crawling across fields, coming to little stone walls and looking over and then crawling. And he said we did that for a few hours. And then just before dawn, he said, he came to a little stone wall and he stood up in front of this little stone wall to crawl over it. And there was actually a German behind it. And as soon as he stood up, he shot him and shot off the top of his shoulder. And he just dropped down. And he said, I was lying there bleeding, thinking, well, if I move or make a noise, he's going to come around and finish me. And after dawn, a little while, the German came round. And as David told me, Lord Ennals told me, the young German, he said he was the same age as me. He was feeling worse than me. He was so like shocked that he had shot somebody, that and they talked. And David realized he wasn't the enemy at all. He wasn't the enemy. He was just like me, a young man who wanted a life, wanted a career, just wanted a normal life, but somehow he had been caught up. And then David said, I realized the absolute futility of war when I met him. And that scene changed his life. And he literally he had to go to prisoner of war camp, etc. And he always had a damaged shoulder his whole life. But that scene changed the destiny of his life. And he realized that no one's my enemy. All the human family, you know, I can have, are my brothers I have compassion for. I once also gave a meditation course to a man in Australia who was like a film director. And he became incredibly successful internationally. And he said that the more he became successful, the more money he made. He just lived a very hedonistic life, drank a lot, began to drink so much, etc., that it affected his job. And after a while, his whole life fell into pieces.
Om
He lost
Shanti,
his
Charlie
work.
brother, to disturb you, could you slow down a little bit? The translators are feeling a bit overwhelmed. It's a bit fast. Thank you, brother.
I should have compassion for the translators. Please remind me when I'm speaking too fast. I'll try to remember. Anyway, this man was telling me that he became an alcoholic. And he said that he really reached the bottom from being so successful and, you know, famous, wealthy. He had nothing. And he went through a very, very low period. But when he started to get better, he began to help other people with addiction. And now he travels the world helping people with addiction. And he said to me that he had to reach the lowest point to find his real purpose and really find compassion for others. So sometimes, you know, sometimes when we reach a low point, we learn about, you know, others and what they go through and their suffering, and it brings out my compassion. Even I remember an oncologist, a doctor who said that many times people would come to see him and say that they were having a bad experience in the medical system. You know, you often hear this, and he said so many times I heard patients say they weren't enjoying going from doctor to doctor when they were sick. And he said for years and years and years, he heard these complaints. Then he got cancer and he had to go through the medical system himself. And he said it completely changed me. I started to have compassion for everybody because I began to realize as a doctor, I'm not just treating a body, I'm treating a person. And he said, I also had to have the experience of my patients to really offer compassion to everyone around me. And so it is amazing, isn't it, that we actually have life experiences that withdraw my capacity to perhaps have compassion for others. But where does compassion begin? We all know it begins with having compassion for me. I would say self-compassion is one of the most important things in life. And if I was to ask you, how do you treat yourself? Absolutely honestly, how do you talk to yourself in your mind? What is your self-talk? Are you loving? Are you gentle? Are you forgiving? Are you compassionate? Or do you sometimes talk very harshly to yourself, very critically? Do you put yourself down? You know, do I really show compassion towards myself? Because really my experience is it's hard to extend genuine compassion to others if I don't have it for myself. And when I do this internal journey to experiencing who I am, I often feel that all of us at this time have three personalities sitting inside of us. I would say two of them aren't very compassionate, but one of them really begins to emerge a genuine compassion for myself and for others. The first personality I call the I of arrogance, the I of superiority. This personality takes all its sense of identity from the labels of my body. Who am I? A whole set of labels, my gender, my nationality, my culture, my religion, my profession, hundreds of labels. What's common to all of those labels? They are temporary. And when the I of arrogance, the I of superiority is ruling my inner system, what happens? I compare with others and I think I am better, I know more, I am right, And when it comes into my feelings, when my ego is ruling inside, then that's when I feel so easily insulted, disrespected, not valued, excluded, sensitive. And when I'm feeling all these emotions, when my ego is ruling, I don't have much compassion for others. I have a lot of judgment, actually. I'm quite critical, I'm quite judgmental of those around me. So that first personality, which is born from this sense of my identity being a temporary body. The more I think I'm a temporary body, the more ego I have and the less compassion I can have. The second personality is the ego of inferiority. The ego, which is like a lack of self-respect. This is the powerful I actually at the moment. And this identity also takes my whole sense of self from the labels of my body. And when it's ruling my inner world, it's the opposite. I think in the opposite way. Others are better, others know more. Others don't love me, others don't respect me. And when this lack of self-respect, this ego of inferiority is dominating me, that's when I feel hopeless about myself, inadequate, not good enough, unworthy, inferior. And therein this I is ruling. I have no self-compassion. I tell myself I'm a failure. I tell myself I'm no good. I tell myself I'm hopeless. This has such a debilitating effect on the quality of my life, and it affects each and every part of my life. So what often happens is I just fluctuate between my ego and my lack of self-respect. And the result, no compassion for the self and none for others. But when I really understand and experience the third I, the original I, the soul. And that soul is absolutely extraordinary. Even though I've been, in a sense, of meditating on this for 3/4 of my life, I'm still absolutely fascinated. Science is telling us these days that this body is made up of around 40 trillion cells. Can you believe that? It's just an unimaginable number. The soul is more subtle than one cell. The soul is more subtle than one of those cells. How subtle am I? And I, this soul, have lived before this body. I'm going to continue after this body. I am immortal, non-physical, eternal. This is who I really am. And none of the labels of my body really describe me. I'm not a male or female, and I'm not European or Asian, and all these labels which we all receive actually come with my temporary self, not with my permanent self. And really, I think that when I reconnect with myself as the soul, not the image of the body and the labels of the body, no, I start to have a relationship with myself as the permanent self, the consciousness. Life changes dramatically. It's like I look through a whole different lens. I see a whole different existence and what's important. When I look through the lens of my temporary body, I start to see what's important is material gain and being respected and noticed and acknowledged. But when I look through the lens of who I really am, I see what is important is really to have the highest quality thoughts, the highest quality feelings, the highest quality actions, because only this goes forward. When I die, not one material thing will go with me, not my body even, or my relationships. So it's an indicator where to put intention in my life now. This is having compassion for myself, to really give time to me, give time to my spiritual development, give time to create quality thoughts and feelings. And out of those quality thoughts and feelings, to behave well, and to act according to my higher self. I think compassion for me is really to learn to meditate, to live a simple and pure life, and to heal. It's essential. In fact, I would say the loudest voice at this time is the voice that says, give time to the self. It is not selfish. The more I heal, I grow, I transform, I feel close to God, the more I will have compassion for myself, and I can offer compassion to others. Because first, I really need to give compassion to the self. But then also, I need to give compassion to those I live and work with. Like I was saying, that's not so easy. I know them well. I know their faults. I know everything about them intimately. And yet I would say the greatest act of love is to know the value of others. To me, the greatest gift I can give to a person I love is to hold their value in my attitude, to really value them. The woman who was the head of the Brahma Kumaris for 38 years, Dadi Prakashwani, was absolutely extraordinary in this way. Everyone she met, she held their value in her attitude. They felt uplifted. This is real compassion, seeing the beauty in another. There's no greater gift I can give to another person. But I not only need compassion for the self, compassion for those I live and work with on a daily basis. I need to even have compassion to those who don't agree with me, and allow people to have a different perspective. I have my own views of life, but allow other people to have their view, give them, they're allowed to have their perspective on life. Sometimes to feel that others should think like me. But I think one of the great wisdoms of life, perhaps one of the great compassions of life, is to accept difference. Allow people to be different. What do they say in the 4 phases of groups? There's forming, storming, norming, and performing. We come together forming, superficial. The second phase, storming, differences will emerge. We are all different. It's actually normal. It's absolutely normal. But how do we move from storming to norming? In a family, in a group, in a workplace, when we accept difference. If I always think, you should think like me, you should behave like me, you should see life in the way I perceive life, I'm always going to come in conflict with others. But a form of compassion is to respect that you are different, and that's great. Actually, I feel the more we have self-respect, the more we can respect others and allow them to be different from me. Why is the world in so much conflict? Because this group feels you should think like me. You should believe what I believe in. You should dress like me. If you look different, I feel threatened because you're different from me. Unfortunately, the more people feel threatened, it's a sign we lack self-respect. So I have compassion for myself. I have compassion for those I live and work with. I have compassion for those who are different. who think differently. And I have compassion really for the whole world. Really, this whole world is my family. How do I think that? When I see that everyone is a soul, I absolutely love this. Go beyond the labels and see where we have a point of connection. We are all souls. And the more I have the ego of my body, the harder it is to have compassion for the other. But the more I become soul conscious, the natural response is really to have compassion and love for the other. We are a human family. And really, where does all of compassion stem from? I think, as we were touching on, it's my love for God. I would say one of the byproducts of a relationship with God is to have this compassion for everyone around me. And really at the heart of what the Brahma Kumaris offer is a loving relationship with God, to remember God. And these days, sometimes I feel for many people, meditation's a challenge. Because sometimes that word implies I have to change my consciousness. I have to sort of step out of a low state into a higher state. And when we sit to meditate and that doesn't happen, deep down, many people feel I can't meditate. I'm not good at meditation. And this is why we love to use the word to remember God. Because when I remember, three things happen. First, I connect. Second, I'm influenced. Third, I have a feeling. Remembering is absolutely natural. As I've been talking, you've been remembering family members, remembering what you have to do, remembering many things. You are constantly remembering. You constantly plug in, connect. You're then influenced and you have a feeling. And what are we saying here? If I connect with God, I remember God as the supreme soul, a point source of life energy, but an unlimited ocean of love, peace, purity, and power. When I connect, I'm influenced by that soul. Naturally, I'm influenced by that love, that peace, that purity, just like I'm influenced by a human soul. And when I'm influenced, it's almost like I download the feelings of God into me. That love, that peace, that power, and definitely that compassion. I absolutely, tangibly notice that when I remember God and I feel that sense of closeness, like the lover of the soul, my compassion for the other just grows. I can see it growing. And I would say really the key to compassion is to feel close to God, to feel loved by God, and to remember God. And when I do, I have that compassion for myself. And really, I offer this amazing sense of love, compassion, support to everyone. I really feel that this is so necessary in our world at the moment. Look at our world. It's just so much judgment. Look at the media, judging everyone. There's just so much judgment between countries, so much judgment between communities, so much judgment in families, and even so much judgment within ourselves, of ourselves. Compassion really makes me feel much better about who I am. My experience is that if I'm judging people, deep down, I don't feel so comfortable about who I am. Deep down, I don't feel comfortable about myself. But when I offer compassion, genuine compassion and respect, I feel much better about who I am. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I'll just have a few minutes of meditation. I can suggest that we put down devices and phones and distractions. And ask my heart the question, how do I treat myself? Am I loving? Am I caring? Am I gentle? Am I compassionate? Compassion means to live by my truth. To behave in a way I know is right. And to give respect to my true self. But perhaps sometimes I lose that compassion for myself. I become self-critical, talk down to myself. To fill myself with the power of compassion, let me remember the divine. Visualize yourself as the tiny soul sitting in the front of the brain and the center of the forehead. Just sitting lightly in the forehead. And in this sweet place of soul consciousness, let me visualize God, Shiv Baba, the Supreme, as a radiant jewel of light. The ocean of love. Allow yourself to be completely loved. Feel this pure love healing me, holding me. And just observe, the more I taste this love, this love transforms into compassion for myself, for others, even for those who don't cooperate with me, for those who disagree with me. because I see beyond the disagreement. I see the soul. I see the other is suffering and under the influence of their own story. So I decide to offer the gift of compassion. This gift of compassion, seeing their virtues, having good wishes, is the most precious gift in life. Each time I come in front of another and I think, what is the gift I want to give you? Let me give this gift of a divine attitude. They will feel uplifted, and I also will feel uplifted. Om Shanti.